From the Tanglewood Tales, The Dragon's Teeth, Part 2. This was a mournful story, as you may well think, for the three boys to carry home to their parents. King Agenor, their father, was the ruler of the whole country, but he loved his little daughter Europa better than his kingdom, or than all his other children, or than anything else in the world. Therefore, when Cadmus and his two brothers came crying home and told him how that a white bull had carried off their sister and swam with her over the sea, the king was quite beside himself with grief and rage. Although it was now twilight and fast growing dark, he bade them to set out instantly in search of her. "Never shall you see my face again," he cried, "unless you bring me back my little Europa, to gladden me with her smiles and her pretty ways. Begone, and enter my presence no more, till you have come leading her by the hand." As Agenor said this, his eyes flashed fire, for he was a very passionate king, and he looked so terribly angry that the poor boys did not even venture to ask for their suppers, but slunk away out of the palace and only paused on the steps a moment to consult whither they should go first. While they were standing there, all in dismay, their mother, Queen Telephasius, who happened not to be by when they told the story to the king, came hurrying after them and said that she too would go in the quest of her daughter. "Oh no, mother," cried the boys. "The night is dark, and there is no knowing what troubles and perils we may meet with." "Alas, my dear children," answered poor Queen Telephasius, weeping bitterly, "that is only another reason why I must go with you. If I should lose you too, as well as my little Europa, what would become of me?" "And let me go likewise," said their playfellow Thassus, who came running to join them. Thassus was the son of a seafaring person in the neighborhood. He'd been brought up with the young princes and was their intimate friend and loved Europa very much, so they consented that he should accompany them. The whole party therefore set forth together. Cadmus, Phoenix, Cilix, and Thassus clustered around Queen Telephasius, grasping her skirts and begging her to lean upon their shoulders whenever she felt weary. In this manner, they went down the palace steps and began a journey which turned out to be a great deal longer than they dreamed of. The last they saw of King Agenor, he came to the door with a servant holding a torch beside him, and called after them into the gathering darkness, "Remember, never ascend these steps again without that child." "Never," sobbed Queen Telephasius, and the three brothers and Thassus answered, "Never, never, never, never." And they kept their word. Year after year, King Agenor sat in the solitude of his beautiful palace, listening in vain for their returning footsteps, hoping to hear the familiar voice of the queen and the cheerful talk of his sons and their playfellow Thassus entering the door together, and the sweet, childish accents of little Europa in the midst of them. But so long a time went by that, at last, if they had really come, the king would not have known that this was the voice of Telephasius, and these the younger voices that used to make such joyful echoes when the children were playing about the palace. We must now leave King Agenor to sit on his throne, and must go along with Queen Telephasius and her four youthful companions. They went on, and traveled a long way, passed over mountains and rivers, and sailed over seas. Here and there and everywhere, they made continual inquiry if any person could tell them what had become of Europa. The rustic people of whom they asked their question paused a little while from their labors in the field, and looked very much surprised. They thought it strange to behold a woman in the garb of a queen, for Telephasius, in her haste, had forgotten to take off her crown and her royal robes, roaming about the country with four lads around her, in such an errand as this seemed to be. But nobody could give them any tidings of Europa. Nobody had seen a little girl dressed like a princess and mounted on a snow-white bull which galloped as swiftly as the wind. I cannot tell you how long Queen Telephasius and Cadmus and Phoenix and Cilix, her three sons, and Thassus, their playfellow, went wandering along the highways and byways or through the pathless wilderness of the earth in this manner. But certain it is that before they reached any place of rest, their splendid garments were quite worn out. They all looked very much travel stained, and would have had the dust of many countries on their shoes if the streams through which they waded had not washed it all away. When they had been gone a year, Telephasius threw away her crown because it chafed her forehead. "It is giving me many a headache," said the poor queen, "and it cannot cure my heartache." As fast as their princely robes got torn and tattered, they exchanged them for such mean attire as ordinary people wore. By and by they came to have a wild and homeless aspect, so that you would much sooner have taken them for a gypsy family than a queen and three princes and a young nobleman, who had once a palace for their home, and a train of servants to do their bidding. The four boys grew up to be tall young men with sunburnt faces. Each of them girded on a sword to defend themselves against the perils of the way. When the husbandmen, at whose farmhouses they sought hospitality, needed their assistance in the harvest field, they gave it willingly, and Queen Telephasius, who had done no work in her palace save to braid silk threads with golden ones, came behind them to bind the sheaves. If payment was offered, they shook their heads and only asked for tidings of Europa. "There are bulls enough in my pasture," the old farmers would reply, "but I never heard of one like this you tell me of. A snow-white bull with a little princess on his back. Ho, ho! I ask your pardon, good folks, but there never was such a sight seen hereabouts." At last, when his upper lip began to have the down on it, Phoenix grew weary of rambling hither and thither to no purpose. So one day, when they happened to be passing through a pleasant and solitary tract of land, he sat himself down on a heap of moss. "I can go no further," said Phoenix. "It is mere foolish waste of life to spend it as we do in such wandering up and down and never coming to any home at nightfall. Our sister is lost and never will be found. She probably perished in the sea, or to whatever shore the white bull may have carried her. It is now so many years ago that there would be neither love nor acquaintance between us should we meet her again. My father has forbidden us to return to his palace, so I shall build me a hut of branches and dwell here." "Well, son Phoenix," said Telephasius sorrowfully, "you've grown to be a man and must do as you judge best. But for my part, I will still go in quest of my poor child." "And we three shall go along with you," cried Cadmus and Cilix and their faithful friend Thassus. But before setting out, they all helped Phoenix to build a habitation. When completed, it was a sweet rural bower, roofed overhead with an arch of living boughs. Inside, there were two pleasant rooms, one of which had a soft heap of moss for a bed, while the other was furnished with a rustic seat or two, curiously fashioned out of the crooked roots of trees. So comfortable and homelike did it seem that Telephasius and her three companions could not help sighing to think that they must still roam about the world instead of spending the remainder of their lives in such cheerful abode as they had here built for Phoenix. But when they bade him farewell, Phoenix shed tears and probably regretted that he was no longer to keep them company. However, he had fixed upon an admirable place to dwell in, and by there came other people who chanced to have no homes, and, seeing how pleasant a spot it was, they built themselves huts in the neighborhood of Phoenix's habitation. Thus, before many years went by, a city had grown up there, in the center of which was seen a stately palace of marble, wherein dwelt Phoenix, clothed in a purple robe and wearing a golden crown upon his head. For the inhabitants of the new city, finding that he had royal blood in his veins, had chosen him to be their king. The very first decree of state which King Phoenix issued was that if a maiden happened to arrive in the kingdom mounted on a snow white bull and calling herself Europa, his subjects should treat her with the greatest kindness and respect and immediately bring her to the palace. You may see by this that Phoenix's conscience never quite ceased to trouble him, for giving up the quest of his dear sister, and sitting himself down to be comfortable while his mother and her companions went onward. And I think we'll pause here and continue with this story in the next video. I hope you're liking it. I hope you've reached down, clicked like, and subscribe. And please leave a comment down below too. Thanks so much for listening in. Love you guys. As Tigger says, ta-ta for now.